So let me say a few words about our research center. Mackenzie Integrity is a research center of public policies and integrity that develops studies relevant for society. We work among several fields and sciences, and we establish connections with national and international organizations and research centers. The Energy Governance Research Group aims to present the state of the art of the energy transition in Brazil and other main countries, including laws, policies, technologies, stakeholders, and theses that offer legal and regulatory solutions, such as reinterpretation of existing law, new or more modified programs consistent with existing law, agency guidance or policy, legislation and administrative rulemaking, private governance initiatives, for instance, protocols, good practice, ESG guidelines, carbon markets, compliance, and certification systems, and other instruments. I want to state that today is the Legal Intern Day in Brazil, Professor. So without our legal interns here, Laura, Heitor, Isaac, also Lucas, Leticia, Elena, we would not reach not even half of what we achieved right now. So thank you so much for the hard work that you put here. The research group is now mapping the energy policy of Brazil. Yeah, so we talked about, you can change it. We are mapping the energy policies of Brazil and some selected countries, aiming to provide an interactive open access platform for researchers on the subject of energy governance, containing law, regulatory acts, key players, scientific studies, analyze the synergy between the themes of social environmental infrastructure and carbon markets, produce a comparative report and understand the global scenario and the restraints of the Brazilian regulatory framework, normative adaptation strategies to assist in the energy transition. So these are the professors that we are going to start. You can change. Thank you. So these are the professors that are going to succeed this August, the coming weeks. Professor Max is going to talk about waste to energy. Professor Ricardo, environmental licensing and bioenergy. Professor Susana from Rio de Janeiro, she's coming to speak about energy governance and the new industrial revolution. Professor Weber Amaral is from the Harvard University. He's speaking about energy transition and the carbon markets. Professor Melina is going to talk to us about the public policies and artificial intelligence in the energy transition. Professor Harrison is going to talk about the wind power in the northeast of Brazil and the exceed of production of energy. Professor Isabella Borbach, she's coming to talk about economic opportunities of the CCS and CCUS technologies. Professor Tamash is going to explain the biogas and biomethane programs in Brazil. And Professor Maria João Rolim from the Dundee University, she's going to talk about renewable hydrogen and regulation. So these are the professionals that are going to speak to us about the energy transition. And of course, the energy transition is part of the economy's decarbonization process, a reality that will extend in the coming decades. And Brazil has a large comparative advantage over the rest of the world, as our energy matrix provides over 45% of clean energy sources. If we consider only the electric matrix, Brazil produces over 90% of clean energy. But today we want to learn about the United States. So that's why we invited Professor David Loomis. Professor David Loomis gently accepted our invite, and he's a professor of economics at Illinois State University, and he's also the co-founder and director of the Center for Renewable Energy of the Illinois State University. Professor Loomis, it is an honor to have you here with us. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and sharing your time, your precious time with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Stop sharing. Stop sharing. Okay.
Are you seeing my slides?
Yes, Professor, thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for having me. Now I don't feel like I should be here after you introduced all the other speakers, and I would love to attend and hear what they have to say. So I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity, and I hope to give you a good overview. I'm happy to take questions and go into more depth on any particular issue as we go to the question and answer. I started out in kind of a non-traditional way. I worked in industry for 10 or 11 years before coming to the university, and I was in the telecommunications industry. And so as I came to Illinois State University as an assistant professor in 1996, it was just the right time in terms of transition. And in the regulatory area, it was really regulatory economics was focused less so on telecommunications and more on energy. So really, I started out as a new professor. I was doing telecommunications research, but focused a lot on the transition that the industry was making at that point away from monopoly and regulation and towards competitive markets. And we'll see that influence come out across the things that we're going to talk about. I've looked at policy issues, both in the state of Illinois and the broader community, and helped our Center for Renewable Energy, as was mentioned. So I'll start off with definition because there is some ambiguity depending on who you're talking to and how they reference things, what exactly we mean by the energy transition. The more narrow definition would just be the closing of electric generating plants using coal and the transition from coal, away from coal and towards renewables, with the biggest of those being wind and solar. And then all the issues that are associated with how do we go from baseload generation that is dispatchable, meaning that we can generate it whenever we want, towards intermittent resources of wind and solar. How are we able to make that transition? So that's a whole set of issues. But a broader definition would also include the movement away from fossil fuels towards renewable resources. So here we're thinking of the transition mostly in the transportation sector away from crude oil and towards renewable resources, whether they be ethanol or whether they be electrifying the fleet of vehicles so that we have EVs, and we're seeing that transition in terms of passenger cars. But what do we do about other parts of the transportation sector in terms of trucking, other vehicles? Can we get to 100% there? And then the larger effort, probably the biggest one, would be the effort to decarbonize the economy. So the first bullet point would be basically the first step on that journey. And you could think of these as concentric circles, but the issues and the problems get thornier as we move from that one concentric circle out to the larger area. Just to highlight some of the things that are going to come up, in terms of the difference on definition and scope. It's purely not academic, but it really goes to say where nuclear energy fits in. Are we looking at purely a renewable future, or is our goal to be carbon free? This is a particularly key issue for my home state of Illinois, because we have the largest number of nuclear generating plants of any state in the United States. We get close to 50% of our electricity for the state of Illinois comes from nuclear energy. So nuclear energy, just to be clear, is carbon free, but it's not renewable. So do we, how does that fit in? And are we comfortable with the nuclear byproducts that will come as a result of this generation, and the sourcing of uranium and where we're going to get that? So those are issues there. Obviously, if we're looking at the transportation sector, we're looking at electric vehicles, but how do we electrify the non-passenger fleet? What does that look like, and how can we do that effectively, cost effectively? It does include this transition of natural gas. Natural gas was viewed as being complementary to renewable energy on the transition to of the electric grid. But now there is a movement to do away with natural gas as a source for heating and cooking. And in the United States, heating by natural gas is very large in the northeast of the United States, and here in the Midwest, I would say it's 80% of the homes are heated by natural gas. So that's another big transition. And probably in terms of cooking, we have electric and natural gas stoves is probably 50-50, but we're looking at how do we transition, and how will we know when we're done? If we don't have a specific target and definition, we won't know exactly when we're done. So I'm going to show you a set of slides to give you a set of graphs to show you the transition of where we are right now and where we're headed, and how those definitions work themselves out in terms of magnitudes in the United States. So this is a flow chart, and on this left-hand side here, you have the sources of energy flow in the United States. I apologize if the printing is too small to see. I tried to make this as big as possible, but you can see the top is coal. Coal has been shrinking quite rapidly in terms of coal use in the United States, and we've been exporting more and more coal from the United States to other countries. The next is natural gas. So again, these the sizes here are relative to the BTU energy that is input here. Crude oil, this is crude oil that's domestically sourced in the United States. You'll see we have petroleum imports down below. So this is just what's domestically produced. Natural gas plant liquids is here. That's a smaller part. Here's nuclear, electric power. And then we finally get down to renewable energy. So renewable energy is just a very small bar still in terms of the overall usage of energy in the United States. The matching, and again, as we look at the magnitude of the problem, just take a look at the transportation sector here. These are who's consuming the electricity in the United States. This is total consumption, and we break it into residential consumption, commercial consumption, and industrial consumption, with transportation being outside of that. And if you ignore transportation, that's a big consumer of energy that you've just taken out of the equation for your energy transition. Again, this is looking conceptually at the US energy consumption, but it looks at a slightly different way, and I'll try and explain it. I also, this is the latest that's available. The previous slide was 2022. This is 2020 data. They have not, the Energy Information Administration is the main source of energy data in the United States, and they have not updated this slide. I checked this week to see if we had an updated slide. You see that 35% in terms of sourcing is coming from petroleum, but those are being used not in the electric sector, but 68% of this is flowing into the transportation sector, and another 26% is flowing into the industrial sector. So we're using petroleum largely for 2/3 of it, roughly for transportation, and roughly 1/3 for industrial use. The next biggest source is natural gas. And again, we use about 1/3 of the natural gas for industrial processes. Roughly 1/3, 36% of that natural gas is used to generate electricity, and it's split among transportation, residential, and commercial for the rest, with the biggest of those being for heating for both residential and commercial property. Again, you get to renewable energy and you're only at about 12% of the overall sources. So there's a lot of work to be done in the United States in terms of transition. And coal has been, as we said, going down steadily in Illinois. My home state, we have passed a law to close all our coal plants, almost all of them by 2030. So in the next 7 years, and then there's one that got an exemption or an extension to 2035. And as we said before, nuclear nationally is only 9% of the energy mix, but in its 23% of the electricity comes from nuclear, and in Illinois we're at 50%. One of the things that I think should stand out to you is the electrical system's energy losses. Currently, between the conversion of energy input from whatever its native source is, natural gas or coal or other sources, we're actually losing in the conversion and in the transportation. So transmission lines, distribution lines, transformers, etc. It's a very leaky bucket. We are losing 65% of the energy when we do that conversion, and in total, and the distribution. So only 35% makes it to retail and gets sold and used by end user customers. Now I want to turn to kind of the good news in terms of growth that we've seen in wind and solar, and explain a little bit of the dynamics in the U.S. market. We've grown wind energy quite rapidly since 2000. If you see the line here is our cumulative capacity of wind energy, and the bars are the annual increases that we've seen. So we started by the year 2000, we had almost zero in the year 2000, and it's been in the last 23 years that we have grown this industry quite a bit over this time. But it's not a steady increase, as you'll see. One of the things I think that stands out is this transition from 2012 to 2013. In the United States, we subsidize wind energy in the form of production tax credits. So these are not, or should say at the beginning, they were not outright grants of money, but they were tax credits. So you would have to have a they call it a tax appetite. You would have to have a taxable liability with the U.S. federal government to be able to utilize these tax credits. So if you weren't making lots of corporate profits, then you might not have a use for these tax credits. And so we've developed kind of financing arms and legal structures by which entities with large tax liabilities like banks, private equity firms, and others can take an ownership stake in a wind farm and use all of the tax credits, even though they don't own 100% of the wind farm. Just rough numbers, the production tax credit, the subsidy to the wind industry, ends up being about a third of the revenue that's given for a given wind farm. And the other thing of note is it's done on it's called a production tax credit because it's on a per kilowatt hour of electric that's actually generated. And this comes from our early history in subsidies to the wind industry, where people put in very substandard wind turbines that didn't last very long in terms of producing electricity, but they had gotten the money in the form of a grant up front, and then with the thought that this wind farm is going to be producing electricity for the next 30 years, and in nearly 4 or 5 years, the turbines aren't producing, there's not nearly as much electricity going on to the grid, but yet somebody has taken that subsidy and utilized it. And so this was an effort to make sure that you were investing in good quality turbines that were going to be able to produce and last the expected 30-year life of a wind farm. What happened here in 2012 to 2013 is that the production tax credit, this main vehicle for subsidies, was set to expire at the end of 2012. And so there was a big rush to build projects and get them operational, because only then could they qualify for the production tax credit. And so you saw to that point, the highest amount of wind turbines and wind farms coming into operations. But then we have this boom and bust cycle where everybody wants to qualify for the production tax credits, worrying that it won't be renewed. And then you draw forward some of the build that would have likely been in 2013. So what you had was a period in 2012 where you couldn't get a turbine because it was totally sold out. People were working overtime as much as they could to get turbines in the field. In order to qualify, and then everybody gets laid off in the wind industry in 2013. And so recognizing this, I think everybody recognized it in the industry and said, we can't let this happen again, where we let it expire, go to the very end before we renew it. We need to have a plan well in advance so that people can make investment decisions. And so you've seen a more steady pattern of annual additions each year. The dispersion of wind energy is not uniform across the United States. You will see the biggest state in terms of wind energy is Texas, and the next largest state is Iowa, but Texas has basically 3 times as much as the next nearest state in Iowa. Here's Illinois that I keep referencing, where I'm from, Illinois State University. And we are down at, I think, the 6th largest state in the United States. But you'll notice a pattern here across the United States in that all of this region has little to no wind energy. It's all zero installed, or very, very small amounts in these 2 states. And that's because there's not a very good wind resource to be able to utilize the current technology there. And so what a lot of these states are looking at is offshore wind. We have a permitting process. We have a legal process by which you can do offshore wind. It is struggling at the moment because costs are coming in higher than what we expected. But many of these states that along the coast don't have onshore wind capacity to do very much wind energy, but they do have the availability for the potential, at least, for offshore wind. The reason here is the wind resource, and this is a map of wind speeds across the United States. And you can see that the highest winds here, a wind speed of about 10.5 meters per second, is right in this band in the middle of the country. I said here was Illinois. I said Texas was #1, and they have some really good wind resource. Iowa was #2, and the western part of Iowa has a very good wind resource. But you'll notice that this part, the southeast in the United States, it does not have a very good wind resource. So again, it was western Texas, western Iowa here, but Omaha, Oklahoma, and Kansas here also have a lot of wind energy built. But what is not apparent on this slide is that most of the population in the United States lives on the coast. So the heavily populated Northeast United States, and of course, California. Texas would be the exception. But other than that, it's East and West Coast. So few people live here. And that means that few transmission lines have been built in this region of the country because we just didn't have a reason up until this point to build a new transmission capacity. So I'm happy to talk more about wind, but I want to be mindful of our time and talk a little bit about solar. And I'll start with the solar resource here, since we were just looking at the wind resource. And you'll notice, again, the darkest areas are those areas that have the greatest solar resource. And that's down in this area of the United States. California, Arizona, New Mexico have very good solar resource. And then it radiates out from there, and you tend not to have such a good solar resource in these states up at higher latitudes in the United States. Sorry, I was pointing at the wrong one. So it's down in these states has the highest resource, and then the northeastern states do not have as great a resource. Again, the rankings on a state-by-state basis has California, Texas, Florida, and then surprisingly Virginia at number 4. Go back to that again. That was California, which you say, oh, that has a good solar resource. Texas, which has a pretty good resource, and especially in far western Texas, and Florida, as you would expect. The odd one out is Virginia, and Virginia is has driven this largely through public policy. They have a renewable portfolio standard that strongly encourages renewable resources, and they don't have very much in the way of wind resource, and so they have largely moved to solar, and they have built a lot of solar in the state of Virginia. When we talk about solar, we've got different dimensions. Largely in wind, we're only building in the United States what we think of as utility scale wind. That would be most of our installations would be a typical wind project in the United States would be somewhere between 150 and 300 megawatts of capacity. As turbines have gotten bigger, taller, and more capacity, it means that we've put in fewer turbines, but the size has largely remained about the same. When we get to solar, we've got 3 different categories in terms of solar. The first is utility scale solar. So this again would be, I think, typical until recent years has been about 200 to 300 megawatts for a solar farm. But there are ones that have been permitted as large as 600 megawatts. And there's one that's going to be permitted that's 1,200 megawatts. So it's vast and 4 times or at least twice as big as the other solar farms that we've permitted. Down here, residential and non-residential is largely rooftop solar. So putting solar panels on rooftops of both commercial buildings and of residential homes. And this has been very popular, largely in California. California is the leader by far in rooftop solar. And the reason that solar and wind, I didn't show you a graph of wind, but you will see a similar pattern, is the price decline. So this is looking at US PV prices. This is average for the utility scale rooftop, whether it be residential or commercial. It's average system across all those different ones. And you see a dramatic decline from about $6 per watt to we're now under $1 a watt in terms of there. So you've taken the cost in a period of just 10 years, and it's cost you 1/6 of what it used to cost you 10 years ago. I'll say wind had a similar decline and preceded solar by about 10 years. So you saw a lot of wind being built, and now that we're still building wind in the United States, but have moved towards solar. So let's talk a little bit about governance and how energy is regulated in the United States. There are very distinct markets for electricity, natural gas, and crude oil. Crude oil has no price regulation. The government will seek to manipulate might be a loaded word. It will seek to influence. That's a good word. It will influence the market price by the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. The United States keeps a large reserve that was created after the oil embargo in the 70s to say we want to make sure that we don't have the disruptions that was experienced in the 70s with the oil embargo, and so we are going to have a store of crude oil for emergencies. It was originally designed to be for emergencies, but now we have used it to influence the market price when the price has gone too high. Even though it was available, we've said, well, let's release some to alleviate market pressures and keep the price of crude oil and therefore the price of gasoline low. Natural gas has not had any price regulation for the commodity, like at the wellhead. And traditionally, we have only sourced our natural gas from domestic sources. So we haven't had liquefied natural gas imports. We have had pipelines that come both from Mexico and Canada into the United States. So we have imports, but it's over pipelines and over land. But we do regulate the price that can be charged by pipelines. These are large distance pipelines that will take it from the producing fields into consumer markets. And then we regulate the price of distribution utilities that are going to sell to ultimate customers for natural gas, their distribution pipeline network, and the price that they can sell to customers. So I'll talk about electricity in the next few slides, but and you may all be familiar with this, but I always point this out, that the flows of electricity across the network of interconnected power lines can't be directed. You can't go you can't inject electricity onto an interconnected network at point A and then take it off at point B and have those same electrons that you put on at point A be the ones that are delivered at point B. The flow of electricity on that network is going to operate according to the laws of physics. And so it does work out sometime that we can put electricity on at this side of the grid and take it off at this side of the grid, and it all works, but it doesn't always work, and that creates complications for markets and for a degree of regulation. Electricity has to be produced on demand, so the blackouts can't occur, but we're just on the cusp of having large-scale storage that would maybe call that statement into question. We are just now permitting almost every project that I've been involved in that is building solar is building battery storage alongside the solar, and that will help in the short term, but it's going to be a long time until we have enough storage to be able to store what a solar plant is producing in the morning. So the amount of battery storage that's being put in for these units is not enough to store all of the electricity that's being produced during the day. It's a small fraction of what's being produced, even on that existing solar farm. And so it's going to be a long time before batteries become this market regulating force. And so it's still the case, I would say, that we're going to have to keep electricity in balance on demand to keep those lights on and have reserve capacity to do it. And finally, in the United States, we have this unusual system of regulation such that we have certain parts of the electricity market that is regulated at the federal level by the US federal government, and certain parts of the market is regulated at the state level. And when we get to building new projects, the building permits to build new energy infrastructure is largely subject to local government control. That could be at the as low as the county or township level, a sub-state level government, very local participants that are making decisions on whether to permit projects or not. Just as a kind of anecdotal comment, last night I was to a permitting hearing in a very rural community in southern Illinois that's looking at putting in a 180 megawatt solar farm in a very rural area. And the reason being is they're putting in a new transmission line across that county. And so it creates a interconnection point for a solar farm to connect onto the grid. But it was just average people, mostly farmers. It was an agricultural area that had no background in electricity, how the grid works, and whether this was good, useful, and anything about the energy transmission or transition. Mostly what they wanted to talk about is how much is this project going to pay in property taxes? How will it help our school districts, our rural school districts, educate our students? And we'll assume that it's a good thing. Solar sounds okay, but they didn't really care about any of these things that we're talking about, nor really taking them into consideration. So when we divide up the electric industry, we typically divide it up from generation, transmission, and distribution. The generation market is considered to be competitive. And so you have utilities, regulated utilities that are building generating plants, but you also have independent power producers, entrepreneurial companies that are coming in and saying, hey, we are going to propose, like this one last night, we'll propose to build 180 megawatt solar farm. We're not the local utility. But we go across the country and find good locations to put in solar power plants, and we're going to propose one for this area. And so they acquire the land rights. They go around and talk to all the landowners, say, we would like to put a solar farm on your land. Here's how much money we're going to give you if you lease your land to us. They'll get an interconnection agreement with the transmission grid operator and get in a queue, what we call a queue position, basically saying we would like to be considered to be added to the transmission grid. We could go through the process in more detail from there, but that's what last night was doing, was to take and say, can we have permission to build this power plant on this land in your county? There's other permissions that they're going to get, but largely that's really the first step, and it probably takes a developer 2 to 3 years to get to this point, to do all the studies, all the research to say this is a good location, and we're ready to propose this to the county to get a permit. The second area is transmission. Transmission lines are still considered to be a natural monopoly. They're regulated at the federal level by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC for short. And then the distribution grid that has to get its electricity from transmission as the wholesale market between generation and ultimate customers. This distribution grid is also considered to be a natural monopoly, and it's regulated by state commissions. In Illinois, that's the Illinois Commerce Commission, but generally the name is Public Utility Commission. And each state has a slightly different name for that. So again, we've got a power plant that generates electricity. There's going to be some type of transformer that's going to step up the voltage. This is going to go over long distances here with lots of lines of transmission. Then we're going to have a step down transformer that'll step down the voltage, the distribution lines carrying it to home, and then ultimately connect it to residents or businesses. This is my home state of Illinois, and this graph is a mess, and it was meant to give you a headache. The lines that are going across here are transmission lines. Depending on the color, they are either transmission lines or pipeline, natural gas or crude oil pipelines that crisscross the state. The dots, this circle dot, are coal power plants. So you can see we have quite a bit of coal power plants. This little symbol is wind. Go back. those are wind farms. You'll see we have lots of wind farms. They're very close by the transmission lines. These are transmission lines that are running through the state. We have a lot of energy infrastructure in the state, but the best place if you wanted to build wind or solar is going to be very near one of these transmission lines. We also have an ownership structure. So in terms of governance, we have 168 investor-owned utilities. I put the date on there because they continue to buy each other out. So there's continued consolidation, and I can never keep track of how many are still independent of one another. But there's 168 of those. There's close to 2,000 publicly owned electric utilities. Those tend to be a particular city that will own its own electric distribution company. So a city, we'd say it's been municipally owned, and they're not regulated. They can charge whatever they want because they're part of the local government. And then we have this kind of hybrid industry structure. We have a little over 800 cooperatively owned electric utilities. A cooperatively owned utility is one that is owned by its customers. So the customers own the utility. It's not a government structure. It's privately owned, but it's owned by its customers. And I actually get my electricity. I'm part of a co-op, and I get my electricity from an electric co-op. Here's just graphs, but the important thing to see is that the investor-owned utilities have most of the customers. 110 million customers get serviced by investor-owned utilities, and publicly owned and cooperatively owned have much smaller shares in terms of the customers, and it's because the investor-owned utilities are in densely populated areas that are lower cost to serve, and cooperatives and municipally owned tend to be in more rural areas or less densely owned areas. This is just looking at how they're dispersed. You can see there's a lot of overlap, but the investor-owned utilities are highly correlated with densely populated states and areas of the state. And then you see publicly owned are smaller areas and tend to be more rural areas in the United States. I'll skip that slide for now and move to our problems. One of the problems is that we deal with in energy transition is, will we have enough generation at the right time? Renewables are intermittent, and the question is, what do we do when the sun isn't shining and the winds aren't blowing? Large-scale solar could be an answer to that, but the timing and the costs are still unknown. Battery storage is getting much cheaper. If it could do in terms of the cost curve what over time what solar did, that would be a wonderful solution. The question is whether that would be happening. And then the question is whether we need natural gas as a bridge fuel to get us through to higher penetrations of renewables. Natural gas has the attribute that a natural gas generating plant can shut down and start up, ramp up very quickly. And so it's a good complement to renewables and dealing with this intermittency. Second problem is the need for transmission. I showed you kind of how we've got most of the wind resource in the middle of the country, and we've got most of the solar in the southwest part of the United States. But we've got the population centers in a very different place. So we need to build transmission capacity in order to utilize and unlock the value of having those high wind and solar resources. And we need to build them across the United States and have a more robust structure. But transmission is expensive to build. In the United States, it costs roughly $1 million a mile to build transmission line, and we are really talking about tens, if not hundreds of thousands of miles of line to be able to connect all of those resources to all of those population centers. And it is notoriously difficult to get permission to build transmission lines in the United States because you have to typically get permission from both the federal government and every state that you want to transmit. You have to get that state to agree to permit your project. I was involved in one that just had 4 states, and they got 3 out of the 4 states, and 1 state said, no, you can't build in this state. And so the whole project was wrecked, and they had to go, and they're trying again, but it's taken them 10 years of trying to get just permission to build the project, not even in construction. And then the final one is electric vehicles. Our distribution grid wasn't built for electric vehicles and charging infrastructure. And the question is, do we need to update our distribution network? And who's going to do that? And who's going to oversee that update? To what degree can we have distributed energy resources like rooftop solar that then pairs with home charging to alleviate the need for additional capacity on the distribution grid? Or do we need to have some type of pricing structure that would shift EV charging to off-peak times so that we can level out demand? There's lots of proposals being looked at for how we make that transition. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions you have, and look forward to comments, questions, thoughts.
Professor David Loomis, thank you so much for this wonderful explanation and overview. We were traveling with you all over the United States, checking out the sources and all the challenges that you are facing there, right? So it's a huge moment. I'm going to ask the students if they have any questions, but if I may, while they're warming up, I would like to have some comments here on your presentation. The first thing is about when you're talking about the efficiency, energy efficiency, you were talking about the grids, the transmission and distribution, and I was thinking about the smart grids to diminish inefficiency, because you were talking about 65% of energy that is lost during the process of production and distribution, right? So
yes.
How is the smart grid thinking in the United States? Here in Brazil, just for you to know, we are producing a lot of energy, the wind power and solar in the northeast of Brazil. But the main population and the industry is in the southeast of Brazil. So we still need to improve the smart grid, because we have overproduction in the northeast and we have the need in the southeast. So there's a lot of talk about the smart grids and also the law, and to update the law environment, the regulation, and to also help investment in this area as well. And just before passing it back to you, you were also talking about the licensing process, right? And you were talking about the environmental permit and how long it takes to get a permit to build a plant. And you're saying that it would take like 2 to 3 years. We also have this problem in Brazil, and we are changing the law system for licensing. It's all already in the Senate, and we are waiting it to the bill to be voted, and so that we have a new law system for the environmental process and licensing as well. So this is the first question and comment that I ask you.
Yeah, I'll start with the smart grid. We have upgraded in our state. We passed the law to say we are going to have our Grid Modernization Act, and for I think it was passed in 2010. So for 10 years, we allowed our public utilities to invest in smart meters and smart grid technologies in the transmission and distribution grid to upgrade, make that investment. And we said, as part of the law, that they could recover that in rates. So that part of the market is regulated. It had been traditionally regulated by rate of return regulation, and we have formula rates right now, but basically they would recover those costs from ratepayers. But what happened, so the promise of the smart grid was that we will know exactly when you are using your electricity. So because our previous meters just measured how much you used from the last meter reading last month to this month. I come out, we had physical meter readers that would come out and read your meter, and that's how we billed you. This would be able to say we know exactly time of use. And the idea originally was that you then could have time of use rates, so that you could have real-time pricing. And we have a trial going on with real-time pricing. Or it's actually hourly pricing. So your rate for your electricity would vary depending on the hour of the day, and hoping that people will then shift their usage from one time to another. And we found that on a voluntary basis, it's less than 2 or 3% that have voluntarily gone to hourly rates. And there's not a lot of interest among customers, even though it can be proved to them that they would save money by moving in that direction. So smart meters have not been successful because we didn't pair that with any change in consumer behavior. We haven't been successful in seeing a change there. But the smart grid components that were built into the grid itself have provided a great benefit to the grid, not so much on those line losses, but more on reducing outages and enabling the grid to come back after natural disasters. So we've had the case previous to implementing smart grid where people were without electricity for 3 or 4 days, and they were upset. All their food would spoil, and it took a very long time. This enabled us to both harden the grid and make it more resilient to bounce back from outages. And so that it's provided those benefits, but I haven't seen data on anything on how much electricity we've saved on that 65% loss there due to smart grid. And then I wanted to mention the environmental permit. It does take a long time, and we have had county governments, so local county governments, that have said, we don't want any wind farms, we don't want any solar farms in our county, and we're going to create restrictive they can't actually say that. They can't say they can't pass a law saying you can't build a wind farm, but what they can do is say, if you build a wind farm, you have to put setbacks between that wind turbine and a other property owner to be a 1 mile is a common one. It's got to be a mile from anybody else's property. And when you look at how property is divided up in that county, there is no way for you to place even a single wind turbine anywhere in the county and be a mile from any other property line. So it effectively bans wind energy from the state. And so state government didn't like the fact that certain counties were doing this, and they passed a law just 6 months ago to say you can't ban wind or solar like that. You can't ban it outright. And here is a state statute, and you can't be any more restrictive than that in terms of the setbacks to roads and property owners and things like that. And we've seen a huge changeover and now openness to building lots more wind and solar in the state. So it's been very effective in accelerating things and providing more certainty to developers who would want to build wind or solar. So I'm anticipating we're going to see a lot more wind and solar built as a result of these environmental permitting changes.
Thank you, Professor. I was just wondering regarding what you said about the nudging techniques to influence and bring the society more into this conversation and understanding. So to spread the knowledge, to spread the information and make them more aware, the awareness spread, right? And also about the subnational obstacles that you were mentioning, we also have some similar problems here with the subnational governance. I wonder if any of you have any questions? No, you're fine. Nico, do you want to say anything?
Yes, I'd like to know a little bit more about the wind production. As the professor said that in some states like Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, there's like field production of wind energy. And I'm wondering, because these states are known for cyclone tornadoes every year. So I would like to know if is it economic possible to turn this natural problem, I would say, into green energy.
Did you hear
Yeah,
that?
I think so. And I think I heard most of that. I'll go back to that wind resource. In this map, the wind resource here tends to be the areas that are more prone to tornadoes and natural disasters from wind. And then, of course, you get hurricanes that are coming up the East Coast that'll hit with flooding here. But you have high wind speeds all the time, but then they can turn into tornadoes that will come in these regions, especially Kansas and Oklahoma, Western Texas are known for having those. The turbines do have safety features such that they can withstand. I think it's Category 4 hurricanes size winds, and I forget what that is in meters per second, but they are designed to handle those. The advantage here, so if you take capacity factor, so what they actually produce divided by their nameplate capacity of the wind turbine. In Illinois, here with these wind speeds, typically we're seeing capacity factors between 20 and 30%. So of the nameplate capacity, you're only getting 20 to 30% of what you could if that turbine was running, had enough wind to run at its full capacity every hour of every day. But here in Western Kansas, in this, I talked to a developer, and they have capacity factors of 50%. So it's blowing and windy almost all of the time. So you can imagine from an economic standpoint and utilization of that, all other things equal, in that you're going to get, twice as much electricity here as you're getting here in putting that. And so it's much more, economically advantageous to site here because your production values are going to be great in that corridor.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor. Anyone? No? Professor, I just have one last question. First, I will start with the comment about the passenger vehicles in Brazil. You know that over 90% of our vehicles are flex, so we can both either use ethanol or gasoline or diesel or biodiesel, so any mixture. And but I know that in the United States is different. And when we talk about bioelectrification, it seems to me that it's not an advantage point for us right now, but maybe in the United States, although in the United States you go from coal to natural gas, and so you can go this bioelectrification using the natural gas. In Brazil, we don't want to go from hydric or in solar or wind power into natural gas because it would not be an advantage for us. It would not be, we are not going forward, but backwards if we do that. So there is a lot of discussion in the government right now. And I wonder how you see it in the United States, because you just showed us this question about the natural gas and the energy transition, the role of it, and for how long, how many decades, and if there will be like, it's going to be like a place in the United States that you are going to be stuck, in the natural gas. If I see the chart of natural gas pipelines in the United States, like a spider web. In Brazil, it's only like 2 or 3 thick lines only, So I'm really upset and wondering if it's going to be a huge incentive to build pipelines in Brazil for natural gas and bioelectrification through natural gas, instead of just helping and incentive for solar and hydrogen and other sources. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of movement. So in the United States, I think it's clear, at least in the short term, that passenger vehicles will all be electrified, and we're making huge investments for the charging infrastructure. And it seems there's a building consensus, I think, that trucking will largely move to green hydrogen, that will do hydrogen production there. In fact, there's several projects being proposed for hydrogen producing plants nearby heavy trucking areas. So there's plans being drawn. There's federal grants being looked at to help this hydrogen economy move forward. And the nice thing about those natural gas pipelines is a lot of the companies are looking at repurposing the pipelines in terms of a long-term play to deliver hydrogen rather than natural gas over those pipelines, which would be wonderful if we can do that, because it would, we would have stranded costs there in terms of all this pipeline and all this infrastructure. So if it can be converted from natural gas to hydrogen usage and transport it, that would be, I think, ideal from society's point of view. Obviously, ideal from the company's point of view to repurpose their capital. But that's going to be a longer term transition. I mean, I think we've been talking about electric vehicles for well over 10 years, and it's not till the last few years where automakers have declared, nope, we're not going to be making, anything but EVs from this point forward. So I think it's going to take a while. You will see the handwriting on the wall, but to really see it in the numbers and large scale adoption is still going to take quite a while.
Professor David, if you can just stop sharing your screen, please.
Yes.
We want to thank you so much for your generosity of sharing all this knowledge with us. You are already invited to be here in person with us, and so next year we are going to have a huge encounter, and we want to be a reference in Brazil, studying energy and the energy transition. So I want to ask a round of applause, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor. Have a great day and great weekend ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.